Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Vegan Proteins Muscles by Brussels Radio. My name is Ben.
And I'm Giacomo.
Okay, Giacomo. Long time no see, except I did see you a couple weeks ago on the cruise, which was a blast. And I think maybe it just feels like a little while because I've been back and forth and here and there and all over the place, but I'm back now in Massachusetts.
For how long?
TBD. I'm not putting timelines on anything these days because
It's just a word that he says. He's like, yeah, I'm moving here, I'm moving there. And all of a sudden he's like, so much conviction. And 3 months later, you're in a whole new location.
I go where the wind takes me now, which is so funny because I used to be very rigid or very set in my ways and not open to kind of doing things more spontaneous and more on a whim. And I'm still like that in some respects, but I think things have changed for some reason or another. In terms of being a little bit more rigid with my thinking, I think that ties into what we wanted to talk about today, which is dichotomous thinking and black and white thinking.
Well, that's news to me because in typical me fashion, I came to the table completely unprepared. And you and Danny, before this episode, before we started recording, she mentioned what we were going to be talking about, and I purposely, I think, blocked it out. You
were just so excited to tell me about a potential new member of the Vegan Proteins community.
Right.
So I don't blame you for that. I don't blame you for that. I'm excited too.
So we're talking about dichotomous thinking.
Yes.
In terms of
fitness, and I think we can tie it into life too, because I think they're related. Oftentimes, how we think in one realm of our life can spread to other areas. So where I want to start with this is thinking about myself and how I have tend to view the world and how that's related to nutrition and training and all of that. And I know that it's still a pattern that I fall into where sometimes I'll hear somebody say a certain thing, maybe it's someone I respect or I look up to, and then I start thinking like, oh, I need to do things that way or this way. And I get really like, oh, I'm going, just to give an example with training, I'm going to do 1,000,000 sets, or no, I'm going to do minimal sets, or I'm going to be super high intensity, or I'm going to be super whatever it is. With nutrition, it might be I'm doing all whole foods all the way, or I'm doing, I don't care about whole foods, I'm just going to try to hit my macros. And there's these different extremes that you can kind of swing back and forth between. Or, I'm doing 15,000 steps a day, or I'm barely moving throughout my day. And I think it can be easy for me to kind of get into extremes with certain things. So just to give, I guess, one example of that, the first thing I ever did when I learned more about nutrition, I read a book by Mike Matthews, who owns the supplement company 𝐬𝐮𝐬𝐜𝐫𝐢𝐻𝐿. And he's wrote a couple of books like Bigger, Leaner, Stronger, and a couple of those. So that was the first book I ever read really about fitness and working out and nutrition. And so right after I read that book, I wrote myself a meal plan, and I followed that meal plan exactly to the T for 3 months in a row. And I would not deviate or really make any changes at all. Somebody offered me a bite of food or something, I would be like, no, I in my mind, it was I can't have that and I won't get results. Not necessarily had I had more experience, I probably would have realized, okay, it's not that big of a deal to do that or to go out for a meal with friends. I would turn down social opportunities, or maybe somebody came over to cook dinner with my roommates and I would opt out of that because I was like, no, I have to do it this certain way. I have to go to the gym at the same time every single day, stuff like that. And I think it can be a big stressor when you feel like things have to be a certain way.
Yes.
And it can be a big relief and a weight off your back when you realize that if you deviate from that, it's not going to throw everything off and it's not going to be a disaster. But it can be hard to get out of that mindset when you've been in there for a while.
Because routine and being a creature of habit is a way to accomplish really exceptional things. Even though there's more than one way to do something, and arguably better ways, you can get in your own way because you're stuck with this black and white thinking about what you should do, and you're afraid to try to step outside your comfort zone and to critically think about the different kinds of approaches that other professionals take, or what the research says. You're unwilling to change, you're inflexible. Or something else that I think about is how much of your identity can be tied into what you're doing. And that can be an emotional reason for being unwilling to change because you're afraid, right? You're like, well, what if I do things differently and I don't get results, example? Or I feel like I have to do it this way because serving my needs, because it's making me feel a certain way about what I'm doing. And you see this with not just our audience here, but in general in the fitness industry and in fitness circles, where people get stuck and they can't get unstuck on certain kinds of narratives on how they should eat or how they should train or whatever. And I feel like here at Vegan Proteins, we've spent an exorbitant amount of our time and our energy standing our ground, yes, with like evidence-based programming, but also challenging the norm of what people are finding acceptable at any given point in time, being like, well, don't consume anything with oil in it. Oil is bad for you. It's toxic. It's poison. Or protein is the hot button. I'm using simple things right now to not get lost in the details. But and we're like, no, like you should, like we have not been afraid to go against what is the acceptable norm. We have not been afraid to go against the grain, but you get pushback for that. And then over the years, when science proves things to be less wrong over time, eventually people come around. But it's like, don't you kind of wish like people could get there faster, or at least be a little more open-minded, and the dogmatic kind of stuff that can be so pervasive didn't persist out there because of this dichotomous way of thinking, because of how people operate?
I think fundamentally at the base of dichotomous thinking, there's this fear of missing out, like you were talking about, of, oh, well, there's something better over there, or, I can't deviate from what I've been doing because I'm not going to get results, like you said. I think that's really kind of central to the black or white thinking, is just being afraid, like having the fear. And I think that's why having an outside perspective and a coach to kind of say, like, you know what, there's this ideal or this optimal that we can shoot for, but it is really context dependent. It depends on the individual themselves. And I think one reason that this kind of thinking can hurt someone, it can help someone, like you said, like having a routine is really important. But I think you can have structure while still incorporating flexibility into that structure. That's a big conversation I find myself having with clients all the time. It doesn't have to be like, okay, I'm playing macro Tetris every single meal and thinking about every meal on the fly and having nothing prepped and nothing planned out because I can do it if it fits your macros. There's that extreme. And then there's also the extreme of everything is meal prepped at the start of the week. I have every single piece of food planned out to the T that I'm going to eat, and I'm not going to deviate from it one bit. And I think there's a middle ground there. Like maybe you do some batch cooking and some prepping, where maybe you have your dinners planned, or I don't know, maybe you have your breakfast and lunch planned out, but dinner can vary a little bit every night within certain macronutrient ranges, which gives you more social flexibility while still adhering to your goals. And I think where this thinking tends to hurt people is with perfectionism. And I think people who fall into black or white thinking often fall into perfectionism. So they might deviate from their nutrition plan a little bit, and then it's the F it mentality where, okay, now that I deviated a little bit, there's no point in sticking to it anymore. So I'm going to go eat everything because I failed and I let myself down. So it's like, I either stuck to the plan, I didn't. I either succeeded, or I failed. And there's no room for nuance. So like if I didn't lose this amount of weight this week, or I didn't get to this body composition by this time, then everything's been for nothing. And it's really not a productive mindset in the long term, because whatever you have in your brain isn't always going to necessarily correlate. Even if you do everything right, you could still not get to where you think you're going to get, and that could throw you off. So I'm a big fan of, I find myself saying to people to focus on progress instead of perfection, and I think that tends to resonate with people.
Yes, except for when the focus on progress needs to be about, and less about the fact that in order to achieve something, you need to be consistent and have your head wrapped around what you're doing, and a decent routine that works where fitness isn't the only thing you're doing. Right? It doesn't fit neatly into a box, because life will life, right? And while life is lifing, you need to make sure that you can still move with it. And that can be hard for people with, like you said, to your point, and the rigidity with needing to do things a certain way. And then if they're not, then all of a sudden, boom, fly off the handle, and things seemingly upside down. And obviously that doesn't feel good either. So what do? You go right back to.
Can you think of an example, to bring it back to the practical, of your own life or your own journey with fitness, whether that be nutrition, training, any sort of habit, where you tend to fall into this like kind of perfectionist black or white thinking?
I'm trying to think of an example where I don't, honestly. Danny just did a meal prep video for YouTube, and this is like the 8th time that she's done it in the past couple months, and I won't eat whatever she makes, because I'm like, I like what I like. If I enjoy it, I don't have to think about it. I know how much I'm eating, and it's not like classic bro food. It's the same food that I eat every day, and we have all this delicious food that she cooked, and I'm like, I'm just not in the mood. This is my way of not being food focused. I don't want to have to think about what I'm eating. I don't have to think about whether I'm getting enough protein. I don't want to think about it. It's not that I'm afraid to eat it. It's just like, I don't want to be food focused. So I'm not even going to bother eating anything. And then this past week, I was like, you know what? That's stupid. I'm going to eat everything. It's like, do me a favor, Danny. Just put the meal plan up on the refrigerator so I can get a decent understanding of. I would literally try to eat different foods and just like not enjoy them. Different meals and not enjoy them. This is not my creature comfort food. So that's one example. Training, the last year or so, when I get nervous when I'm not doing like what I have prescriptive for my training, I get a little less nervous when I'm the one making the changes, and I get a little more nervous, I should say, because I'm not ready to change. I'm like, oh, what if I don't do my programming as written? What if I go to the gym and just have a play day? And then after that, I get even more nervous when it's someone else. But then I just let go of the control. I'm like, you know what? This is about having fun with you or with Danny. Where I'm going to follow your lead. I'm just going to follow what you do. But some part of me knows that I had to push myself out of my comfort zone to just be like, all right, Ben, you training legs? Go ahead. Whatever you're doing, I'm going to do.
I can relate to both of those, actually. So with nutrition, I think I'm the same way as you, where it's like I might come up with some sort of meal plan or meal system that I really like and I feel good and I'm in a rhythm and a routine with it. And maybe someone makes it like, hey, Ben, I made this like this dish. I'd really love for you to try it. Maybe it's someone who isn't vegan, but they made me a vegan dish and they put a lot of time and effort into it. And I'm like, oh man, like, on the one hand, I'm really liking what I'm doing here, and I don't really want to, if it's not broke, don't fix it sort of thing. That's what I'm thinking in my head. And on the other hand, I'm like, I really want to show my appreciation to this person and incorporate this kind of into my regimen or into my routine. Just thinking about examples from this in the past or even currently, I spend time a lot with my family and living at home. And so maybe at dinner time, that's an opportunity for all of us to eat together, to share a meal. And in the past, sometimes I'd be like, I don't want to have what you're having, or I don't want to, like we're trying to come up with ideas for dinner. I'm like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. Because maybe one reason is like, oh, the macronutrient content of that meal is not going to be what I want it to be with my goals, or like maybe I've already had a lot to eat that day and I know it's going to like put me over my calories if we make this certain thing, or if we order out and we get food out from this one place. And then I'll start thinking it's either like, I can't order, I'm not going out to eat at all, or like suddenly I'm going out to eat 3, 4, 5 times a week. And it can be hard for me to really try to like put it into perspective and understand, I could go out to eat and make choices that are more in alignment with my goals and what I want to do, or less in alignment. Like I still have control, and it's not like this or that thing. It can be both, where I can try to, make conscious choices regardless of what my environment is like. And sometimes it's going to be easier or more difficult, but I still, I don't have to think of it as one way or another. Like I can't participate in this at all, or I'm participating and I'm, going hog wild with it. So that's nutrition. And then I think with training, I'm similar to you, where sometimes I've turned down opportunities to train with friends or with other people because I'm like, no, I'm making good progress on my program. I want to stick to my program. It's like this like safety blanket. It's like a binky. You're like, oh, I know that I'm doing the right, like the quote unquote, the right thing if I'm sticking to my program exactly. It can even come down to, I have my program at the gym and I don't want to switch my exercise order. So you end up waiting half an hour for a piece of equipment because you don't want to, let's say you were supposed to do squat then leg press, but the squat rack's taken and the leg press is open. Well, I don't want to do leg press then squat, because then when I go to squat, I'm not going to be able to lift as much weight, and I don't know how to track that, and I don't know how to measure that. So I'm gonna wait, instead of just understanding that, okay, I can switch it up on one day. It's not going to make a huge deal. Like it comes back to the effort that you're putting forth and training that muscle, even if it's in a slightly different way. And also understanding that maybe training with somebody is not only a social opportunity, but an opportunity to learn from them. And I could pick up one cue or one little way that they do something that can then help me in the long run. So I think it's taking that perspective and saying, what can I learn from this, instead of what is this going to take away from me? Like having it be an additive mindset versus a subtractive mindset, I guess you could say.
And with the training, reading you right, at least the way that I think about it, with the training, it's so much easier to keep doing that and justify what you're doing, because food is a little more complicated and training is just can be so calculated and so routine. For the not for everyone. There probably are there are some people out there that can literally do that with food, but I find that it's a little harder. So the unraveling of that, if you will, when someone falls out of their routine with food and it's a choice or it's not a choice, and that's to accept and be like this. I'm trying to think of, so what would you say to somebody who is struggling with eating in a way where they just we're not comfortable making the choice to eat differently, or just be a little flexible, being a little more flexible with themselves?
I think usually I try to, everyone's a little bit different, right? So their personality, you kind of got to speak to them with, what kind of, you can get a read on them. So for some people, it might be providing a combination of my own personal experience with this and saying, I can relate to you. I felt the same way, and this is how I kind of tackled it. Or this sort of tip or trick seemed to work for these other clients that I worked with, and sometimes that speaks to them. But sometimes people have to go through it themselves to really understand that. So it might be that I say, okay, we can try it your way and see what happens up to a given point. And then they realize that, man, I am feeling kind of restricted. Like I can't go out to eat with my partner, or I'm feeling like, after a time I was really excited about doing this, but it's really hard to eat the same things all the time, or it's really hard to be on it all the time. And so sometimes they have to come to that themselves before they're willing to like deviate a little bit. Like you might have somebody who's like, I want to try to switch things up, but again, I'm scared of the fact that I might lose out on some results here. A common example of this is maybe somebody's been getting really good results, but they're going on a vacation for a week and they're going to be away and out of their routine. And so they're kind of fearful of, I'm going to revert back to my old ways, and I'm not going to, I'm going to deviate, and then I'm going to have a really hard time kind of getting back on track and getting back on schedule. And so I'll try to say to them, you might be going out for more meals, you might be out of your environment, but what can you control? Can you still bring like protein with you and kind of maybe order, get a shopping cart order for where you're going ahead of time to pick up there? What can you kind of plan out? And so try to help them understand that like they still have a lot of control over the situation and it doesn't have to completely derail them. But usually I'll try to just see if I can nudge them a little bit in that direction. So maybe right now they're following a really like rigid meal plan, and I'll say, okay, can we maybe try like, one like Friday nights or Saturday nights, can we try to maybe make like a macro meal where we cook with our significant other, turn it into a date night, and let's allot this amount of calories and protein and macros and stuff. And you say to your partner like, hey, I'd love to cook for you tonight. I was thinking about making a couple different things. What do you think about one of these? And there's like, oh, that sounds great. And then you can, you make it an interactive experience, but you still kind of have some control over, the portions and the macros of that meal. And so it's getting away from eating the same things every single meal all the time, but you're still giving them some control over, I'm still cooking the meal, I'm still prepping it. Their significant other might not care about like the nutritional content of the meal or whatever, but they're still going to enjoy it. And then you're going to enjoy it because you know that you're still kind of working towards those goals and making progress. And once you do that enough and you see nothing bad happens, nothing catastrophically goes wrong, then you're like, oh, I can, go out for a meal, or I can cook at this. And then they slowly start to get that confidence, and you can say, all right, maybe we can do that for a couple more times. Maybe it's dinner every night that we can do that thing. Or you just kind of find these little ways to move someone along that spectrum. And then what's nice about it is, these are all tools that we have. So then if somebody, maybe they're a competitive bodybuilder, maybe that's what their off season looks like. And then when they're 10 weeks out, 8 weeks out in a prep, you start to bring them back towards maybe more rigidity and more structure. So it's not that any of these things are bad. It's just, it depends on the certain person and the phase that they're in. Sometimes you have to be a little bit more rigid, and sometimes you want to be a little bit more loose, even if it's not the easy thing for you. Like it might be the easy thing for you to be super rigid and to be super disciplined, but that might not be the sustainable thing in the long term, especially if you've got people around you that are maybe suffering as a result of that.
Exactly. And it's so easy when you surround yourself, which we all do, right? You surround yourself around people and you create an environment that is conducive to what you want to do. So you wind up having, you wind up being in a position where you're unable to see outside yourself. But then you get put in a position where you have conversation with somebody that can sometimes give you pause when you can see how they're judging you and how you're eating, to try to understand like where you're coming from, or it just helps you reflect on how you're eating. You're like, oh crap, like what I do is okay, but it is also not the norm. And I go through that line of thinking when I start to think about other clients and the goals that I have for them and for myself, and just like the idea of eating, how's the saying go? Eat to live to eat. Like the eat to live thing, and now food is fuel. Food is a tool. Food can get you to a goal. Food and tracking helps you become aware of how much you're eating. And it can get you healthier. Like these things all give you conviction to eat a certain way and to program for yourself in a certain way where you're like calories, very specific, not very specific, but like you pretty much know what you're going to eat and how you're going to eat. Like it's all reason to do that. But the thing that's a little harder to talk about is the idea of how do you make this sustainable? How do you make this a lifestyle? How do you do this in an enjoyable way? How do you establish healthy eating habits and healthy eating patterns that can exist where, like, even though you have these goals and they're big goals, you can still eat pretty much whatever you want within reason. Be flexible with yourself. It's a much harder path to send a client down, but it's, and I feel like a lot of people don't really want it. Like they like the idea of it, but they're scared of it, or they just straight up don't want to do the work. They just rebel. And they're like, no, like this got me results. Why would I do things differently? Or I'm afraid of this. What if everything, like we were talking about in this discussion, what if that starts to go off the deep end? You know, so they double down and they go back, or they're just too afraid to make those leaps. And that's where working with a coach who can help you see past yourself and help you, they've had experience with this, it can make a difference. And it can get you somewhere where like you're eating in a more balanced way, I guess, for lack of a better way of framing it.
No, it's a good discussion to have because it's easier for somebody to say, oh, well, I did this 12-week program, or I had this coach who put me on this protocol and I got results that way. And then they're coming to us and maybe they've kind of reverted back to where they were before. And it's hard to have that conversation about, well, okay, you got those results, but were you actually able to maintain those results? And maybe because you were able to follow that rigid structure for a short period of time, sure, it worked. But how are we going to set you up to be able to do this in the long term? And it's not an easy sell, like you said, and it's not the same approach for every person. There are going to be different approaches that work better for different personalities. And that's where having a coach like at Vegan Proteins, where we take a custom personalized methodology where we're getting to know the person, we're getting to know their lifestyle, what makes them tick, and we can set up these different strategies and these different routines and structure for them, whether that is some combination of meal prepping, flexible dieting, whatever it is that's working for them. We have all these different tools that we can give somebody and help them from where they're at right now to where they want to be. And it's a stepwise process. They might not be ready to track super rigidly on day one. It might just be more habits and getting them kind of in the consistent flow and just having them have some sort of routine. So everyone's coming to us at a different place, and I think it's meeting somebody with where they're at. And it can be hard because you can consume a lot of content on social media where it's like grind all the time. We've talked about this on podcasts before, but if you're in this kind of echo chamber of like, you just got to push yourself, you just got to want it bad enough, you just got to put your head down and do it and not question it and not think about it. It can be really hard to have that nuance and to not think in that kind of black and white way. Like you're on the diet, you're off the diet, you're doing the thing, you're not doing the thing. But as we know very well, nuance and more of these detailed discussions doesn't necessarily produce the best sound bites or clickbait for content. And so it's a lot harder to get somebody to buy into that. But if they're able to stick with it for a certain number of months, start to see the results and start to buy in and believe in themselves, those are the people who a couple years from now, you look at them and they've been able to maintain and continue to progress. Whereas most people, kind of constantly spend, decades of their life just bouncing back and forth between extremes and never really getting anywhere and just feeling worse about themselves throughout the process. So it can be a thing to get people to buy into, but I think we've seen it enough with the people that we work with that once you kind of get to a certain point and you see the magic, so to speak, then you're in.
Yeah. Exactly. It's funny because I think people aren't aware that they're going in that direction, and then so that they keep repeating and keep making the same mistake over and over again because they got to come to it on their own, right? They blame themselves. I wasn't going hard enough, or this was just not the right time in my life. But if you do things a certain way again and again, and the same outcome keeps happening, you're not. Once you realize that if you were to take a little more of a kind of approach where you could take your time getting somewhere as opposed to just like trying to go hard, you'll probably get the outcome you're looking for eventually, as opposed to seeing yourself out of it, which doesn't happen for everybody. I don't think it would happen for someone like you or for me as an example, but I have seen it happen to others, wanted it bad, but they blame life for taking them out of the game. But in reality, it was because they didn't find the approach they needed sooner. Maybe they didn't get the right kind of support. Maybe they were stuck caught up in their own way. But then you could take someone like, well, use me as an example, where I'm willing to just beat my head against the wall to do something, even though I'm doing it improperly, and then eventually get the outcome I'm looking for. But that's still a process also, where I could have done things better sooner. Dichotomous thinking is a limiting factor when it comes to your progress and your results, because you're unable to start to play out different scenarios. And if you're unable to play out different scenarios, and you're unable to take in new information and distill it down and make it work, well, you're going to wind up staying in the same lane, and maybe you get results, and the results that you get are the ones that you're actually.
And I think that's why it's helpful to have some people around you that you trust, that you can get their input from, whether or not that is a coach or maybe just like a friend group or a support group, or people who can provide an outside perspective about what you're doing, because it might seem like a reasonable thing to you, but it might not be to your friends, your family. And I think it's really valuable, even if it's not comfortable, to have somebody say to you, like, this is a lot, do you think you could do this for another 5, 10, 15 years? And maybe you're stubborn in that moment and you say, oh yeah, of course I could. Like, this is a conversation I've had, many times with people around me where, I feel a little bit triggered by what they're saying, and I have to, in the moment, maybe I'm not able to stay as rational as I'd like, and I kind of just brush it off, and maybe I'm a little bit, annoyed by their comment, but then I think about it later. I'm like, I'm probably a little bit annoyed or triggered by it because there's a kernel of truth to it. So I have to be really honest and kind of self-reflect. And so I think my main point is it's helpful to have some outside perspective here when you do find yourself getting into that kind of black and white thinking and challenging. Or if you can do that yourself, if you can challenge your own thoughts and say, is this really true? Like, do I really have to do all these things that I'm doing in this exact certain way to get the results that I'm after? Are there other people who have done it a different way and got great results? Because then the proof is kind of speaking for itself. So get outside your own head, seek out some outside opinions. You don't have to do it alone, and it's helpful to not live in your own space 24/7.
How do you cut through all the social media when it comes to people constantly just putting out the same message they want to beat you over the head with, and it's not necessarily what you want to take in?
It's hard. I think you have to seek out multiple opinions. Don't if all the people you're following are saying the same thing, like that, it's tricky because it can go two ways. Like, you can think, oh, everyone's saying the same thing, so this might be the right way. But oftentimes it's the people who are speaking in absolutes who say you have to do it this certain way. That's what I would look out for when I'm looking at content that I'm consuming. This is the only way to do it. This is the way that you have to do it. Those people who are talking in the extremes, the absolutes, the black or whites, people like it because it's easy and it's simple, but it's not the way forward. And so most of the time, if you're looking at these coaches that we look up to, that we've worked with ourselves, perhaps they're people who speak in the nuance, in the gray, and not in the black and white. And they say, well, this could be a way to do it. This could be another way to do it. This is often a good idea. This is usually a good idea, instead of this is always the way to do it.
Yeah, for sure. So it's the mindset as much as it is the programming that you.
Yes, because if somebody's saying it has to be, it relates because it's like, it has to be high volume, it has to be high intensity, it has to be low carb, it has to be low fat, then that is somebody who is being they're being what's the word I'm looking for? Dogmatic. They're being dogmatic. They have to do it this certain way, and that's not somebody who, it relates to programming. That's not somebody who's speaking in the nuance and the black and white, because it's rarely ever one way or the highway.
Right. And information changes, we learn, and I think it's good to look back on how information has changed over the years and be like, we were wrong. We were following what we knew was what we thought was best at the time. And as information changes, everyone doesn't get to the better conclusion at the same time, right? So it's because it's easy to like think about like who's to blame, and then all of a sudden no one's actually having the right kind of conversation about like, well, no, this was wrong. We did it back then this way. Let's not do it that way going forward, and let's think about a better way.
Yeah, you had a good video about that recently with cardio on the YouTube channel.
And then wouldn't you know it, one of my past clients reached out, said they were watching that video, because that's how you reach people. You don't reach people by saying, I'm right all the time and I'm right now and this is what you should be doing. Like, that doesn't, you don't want someone that thinks like that to be your coach.
No.
You're not going to get anywhere other than perhaps you'll feel good because you have some conviction that they're so convinced this is the way things have to be done and you don't have to really think about it. You just head down and do the work. You don't want that out of a client either. You want a client who's going to challenge and be skeptical and constantly question, right? Because together you can put your heads together and figure out what's best for that client over time. I find myself often getting into conversations like that with clients where there's not enough trust yet. And they're also afraid to question, and they also want to commit. You want to commit to what you're doing, and I get that. Like, commit to your following your program for 12 weeks or whatever. Just like do it. Like, you don't want to get into that place where you're indecisive and you're not following a program. I get that. But while you're following a certain protocol, question, become skeptic, give feedback, ask, have a conversation. Like, that's how you're going to be able to a better outcome in the future by your programming evolving as you learn more about how it is and isn't working for you.
And I think as we've been exposed to more people that we work with over time, you see different approaches work for different people. And it's kind of this self-built-in mechanism to not think in a dichotomous way or a dogmatic way, because what worked for you is not going to work for most of the people that you work with, or maybe, some of the people that you work with. So I think that, we learn as much as from our clients, as much as they learn from us about how to kind of get out of that mindset, and it makes us better too.
Yeah. Exactly. What percentage of your clients you think you have are they take a little pause when you try to get them to challenge you and become skeptical and give you feedback that isn't just like, yes, coach, I'll do whatever you say. Like, you know the type of person, right?
Yeah. The soldier who just they'll just follow orders. And
how do you get someone out of that mindset?
Yeah. I think what I would encourage them to do is just continue to give me their opinion about certain things. What do you think about this? How did that feel when you did that exercise in the gym? What does this nutrition setup feel like for you? Because for the soldier who just follows orders, they might have these different cues or this feedback that their body is giving them about these protocols that we're doing, and they might have their opinions, but they're just keeping it to themselves because they feel like they're less of a client for questioning us, or they just need to put their head down and do the work. But I'm like, at a certain point, if you're doing something over and over and over that you don't like or that isn't working for you, you might get hurt. You might burn out with the nutrition protocol and end up going off the rails. So it's important for us to know. And I'm often trying to kind of pull that out of people of I'd like for you to share with me how you feel this is working for you. And I want your questions and your feedback, and for you to actually, bring me into your world a little bit more, into your headspace. So, you can get more out of coaching, because the more that somebody kind of brings us in and gives us that feedback. I love when I have clients who tell me I'm noticing this, I'm noticing that, this exercise felt great, this one didn't feel so great. They're sending me, form feedback videos. They're asking me I saw a video on this, what do you think about this, or what do you think about that? And I'm like, the more I'm a resource, I want you to take advantage of that and not to be afraid and scared of that, because, you are going to become your best by using me more. You're not going to become your best by just being a yes man all the time.
And you can see the writing on the wall sometimes when someone is following a meal plan as is, but they're talking about how they're going to eat, or how they're snacking on that. Assume that there's some amount of guilt there or amount of shame there, because they're not really saying anything, or at least that's my fear. And I automatically start to rework what kinds of meals I'm offering them if they're on a meal plan, or I start to talk about different kinds of foods in an inclusive way, in a way where those foods are going to be included. This is supposed to be happening. You're supposed to be eating like this. If the client's not discussing it with you first, right? Well, also, and then hopefully they start having conversations like that with you too, and you hope that they can trust themselves to see that, that is in fact how you should be eating. It's just a matter of better wrapping your head around it when you're not eating routinely. I have a client who's a perfect example of that, actually, and he's managed to. I've seen the evolution in him, where he was teasing out the idea of not eating the same way every day, and then eventually did it, but he was afraid, but now he's into it. And it's nice when you see someone make the connections over time, but it doesn't work like that all the time. I find that this is an ongoing challenge with clients, and sometimes they push back. They not only push back, they revert all the way back to the way that they were, and they're like, let's just stick to what's safe right now.
Yep.
what I know works. So
Yep.
it's an ongoing thing. It's a journey.
It is. You want to close us out here?
Yeah, let's do it. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in to another episode of Vegan Proteins Muscles by Brussels Radio. Stay in touch with us on all the socials at Vegan Proteins. Hit the contact button and submit an application if you're interested in one-on-one coaching on veganproteins.com. We will get back to you right away, and we'd love the opportunity to work with you. Once again, my name is Giacomo,
I'm Ben.
and we'll talk to you soon.
Bye, everyone.
See ya. Yeah. Did you know that I didn't know what the episode was about?
Maybe not. I mean, I could tell you were kind of in your own world there when Danny and I were talking about it. So,
I was like,
but I mean, most of the time we don't know what we're talking about. So
Yeah.
we hop right on. So, I really hope you put those bloopers in that we did at the start with the bleed blah blah blah. I hope we leave some of that in.
So now that you're back, what are like your first things that you want to do while you're back here?
Yeah, blah 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 blah
Blah blah blah blah blah.
Talking normally about podcast things
We should
and
be
testing
doing some
the
test
mics,
stuff right now and
mic testing
seeing
and
if
talking
the
normal voice,
volume would be
inside voices.
kind